this episode of Inside the Bible. As usual, we have a talented group of scholars with us. Today, we have John Truett presenting the Women's Bible Commentary. Teddy Brookins is going to be our expert on the Afrikaner Bible. And Nathan Burrow will take us around the world in the Global Bible Commentary. So, John, who was your scholar and what did you learn this week?
I had two scholars. The first was Nyasa Jr. and then Elaine James. These women discussed the role of women in Exodus and how their characters have been interpreted throughout history. Most notably, they note that towards the beginning of Exodus, you have a lot of very positive women characters who actually save Moses' life over and over again. But as Exodus furthers on, and once they're given the law, women are continually pushed to the margins. So you have, for instance, the Hebrew midwives and Zipporah, Pharaoh's daughter, even Miriam, have all saved Moses' life in some way, and in turn have progressed the story. But once the law is given, you see constantly that they're not full members of the community, and they're often pushed to the margins.
Wow. So the law was not nice to women.
No.
Okay. Teddy, who was your scholar and what did you learn?
My scholar was Judy Fentress Williams, and she uses a musical metaphor to show how we can be limiting in our interpretation of the Exodus story. So she talks about two forms of music that are popular predominantly in African American hip hop culture is the remix and the sample. So the remix is it's another version of a song that's distinct from the original and that the different tracks are emphasized. And so it's achieved by adjusting the elements of the song and emphasizing or diminishing particular themes or elements. And so for the Exodus story, you see how Israel, as different members of the culture retell the Exodus story, different pieces and themes are emphasized throughout the generations, and which allows for more of a inclusive, holistic story. You contrast that with the sample, which is where a small segment of a recording is repeated or looped to form the foundation of another song. So musically, Kanye West does this a lot. So he'll take a piece of a Marvin Gaye song or Luther Vandross song and loop it to make something totally new. And this is good because it takes the music into subsequent generations and exposes those artists to newer generations, but it's limited and that you're only getting a piece of the song and you're not you're diminishing other. It's taken out of context. And so for the Exodus story, that theme of the sample that is used is Moses as the solitary instrument of God who delivers his people, and you see that play out throughout African American culture with Harriet Tubman as the Moses figure, or Marcus Garvey or MLK, and that's been helpful somewhat, but that theme, that Moses theme, diminishes the fact that he was often a reluctant, sometimes incapable leader. It diminishes the role that women played in the Exodus story, and so this author just encourages us to use the remix instead of the sample.
Thank you. Nathan, where in the world are we this week and what did you learn?
We are in Latin America, or more specifically Middle America, with my author Jorge Pixley, and it was a little challenging reading this as an American because his experience in Latin America has kind of, I'm not going to go so far as to say that he sees U.S. as the equivalent of Pharaoh and Egypt, but he certainly does kind of weigh towards those in political power and dominance, and focusing in on how the story of the Exodus speaks to the oppressed. And he asks the question, who are the people of God that are are referenced here in the book of Exodus, and the first response would be the Israelites, but he goes on to point out how the Exodus story speaks to more than just that, and the term that's used is the Hebrews, and he argues that these are the rebels, that these are more than just the ancestors of Abraham, but those who are a mixture of peasant people who are ripe for rebellion, and so God is calling Moses, who has already shown that sign of rebellion himself, to have solidarity with those and lead that group, and that the Israelites will emerge from that group. I had never heard that interpretation before, but that was very interesting.
Okay. So the Hebrews become a type.
Yeah, and he referenced material outside of the biblical accounts as well. But he said even within the biblical account, the term Hebrews or Hebrew is used isn't it's not the it goes way beyond the language. This is a type. It was a reference used oftentimes for sojourners, for people who didn't belong, the alien. And he does quote a few passages making sure to point out that the text itself supports that this is a mixed crowd. It's not just Abraham's descendants. Exodus 12:38 mentions that there was a variety of people as they are leaving the land, and the instructions as well that will be even given there in 12 for the aliens and strangers amongst them, and that the men are to be circumcised. And so it's an interesting theory that I had never heard before with that term.
John, what questions would you have of your scholars?
Yeah, I have a question for Nyasa Jr. She wrote the actual commentary section on Exodus, and she talks about how feminist scholars often approach the text in two ways: through exegeting the characters, the women characters, but also noting how interpretations of the text have affected women today. She talks a lot about the exegesis of the characters, but doesn't really talk about how it affects women today. So my question would be, in what ways have she seen negative effects of interpretations of Exodus, and how that's affected women?
Yeah. So she talks about the role of reception history, but she doesn't. You'd like her to sort of explore it a little bit more in terms of
Right.
the 21st century. Teddy, what questions do you have?
I would ask the author to sort of expound on whether she believes that the theme of Moses as the leading figure, solitary figure, delivering his people, whether or not that's been helpful for African American culture. Because I tend to think that it's the idea of the leader leading his people to the promised land has been helpful for African Americans. They held on to that theme through slavery, Jim Crow. So I would just ask her to just explain a little bit as to whether or not she felt that's helpful.
Yeah, good question. Yeah. Nathan, what questions would you ask?
I wish that I was more equipped to be able to wrestle with her on wrestle with Pixley on some of the political angles that he talks about. That he's much more versed in that. But I did have a question just from his commentary. The emphasis seemed to deal a lot more with the movement of an oppressed people trying to reach liberation, and he uses the example of African slaves in the New World, people in third world struggles. But the one thing that the Exodus begs is, once it does move, once the Hebrew people come out of Egypt, I didn't feel like he explained quite as much what do they become as they're no longer under their oppressors. And I guess that's where my question would be is,
Yeah.
what what is the next step in that movement when they're no longer under the thumb of their oppressors? And I didn't feel like
He didn't point the way to Joshua, Judges, Samuel, King.
right, or even in addressing as they're becoming an identity, there wasn't as much emphasis in that area of the text as there was in the earlier portions of this being a people of rebellion. What did they become next?
So it would be nice to know in terms of the history of the people, but also in the location in the canon, sort of where Exodus is on its way to.
Yeah, I didn't feel like he spoke to that as much.
Okay, thank you. Some of you are wondering, after all of this interchange, what the blog? Well, our next episode will tell you what the blog. We've had good questions and insights today about sampling, remixing, the nature of Scripture itself, the issues of leadership, the role of women, and to what degree Exodus is a type, not just for a particular people, but God's empowering of types of people. So that's a lot for you to think about as you watch this episode. We hope you'll join us in our next episode when we start living out this Exodus in the book of Leviticus. I want to thank our guests today, John Hewitt, Teddy Brookings, and Nathan Burrow. Our executive producer today is Devin Dundee. We look forward to seeing you in our next episode.